Back during the dark ages of the 1990s, young Chris Miller stumbled upon an artifact that would become a lifelong obsession. Now, armed with a mind full of nostalgia and a basement full of comic books, Chris attempts to analyze the art and the artist that made him comics crazy.
Why this fool got more comics than a motherfucker?
Hey everyone, this is Chris Crazy House, and I'd like to welcome you all again to another episode of Comics Crazy. And today we're going to be doing another look at an art book instead of just doing a flip through of a regular comic book. And this particular art book that we're going to be looking at is a preview of the classic comic book from the mid-90s, 1994's Marvels, written by Kurt Busiek and drawn by Alex Ross. Now, I'm not exactly sure where I got this preview book from. I'm assuming it came from a Wizards magazine, probably like one of their promotions, the same way I did with the Cliffhanger preview book that came from Wizard as well. But I know I've had this for years, and it's been in my collection ever since the early 90s. It's real short, but we're still going to take a look through at these great sketches and paintings done by Alex Ross of these classic Marvel characters. Let's take a look at the creative team, shall we? Obviously, the creator for this particular preview art book is Alex Ross himself. So let me say this now. At the time that this book came out, Alex Ross was a breath of fresh air for a lot of artists like myself who were not used to seeing these comic book characters in this realistic painted style. We were all used to the classic comic book artwork as well as the Extreme era. This is where we're coming out of the Extreme era, what we had seen with Image Comics, and we were starting to move into a different era. And the comic book industry was going through a lot at this time. It was starting to crash a little bit based on the speculative bubble popping. Jack Kirby had just passed away, so this was a very interesting time for comics, and I believe what Alex Ross was doing here brought back a lot of interest and fandom in comics, especially if you were a classic comic book fan. To be able to see these classic characters in these classic big Marvel storylines painted in a realistic way, it puts you in the viewpoint of someone who would be a spectator to these amazing events. And for someone like myself who is an artist, but also someone who just likes to, just has a very large imagination and loves to daydream, seeing this type of artwork was extremely stimulating to me. And I understand that there are some people who are not fans of Alex Ross or his style of artwork, but I don't hate the man. Also, what I appreciate about him is he is a legitimate comic book fan. You have to understand that when you have art skills like this, and also just the connections that he probably has in the art world, he does not have to do comics, but he has a legitimate fandom of comic books and comic book artwork, and I can do nothing but respect that. So let's get to our flip through and review and take a look at this amazing artwork of these Marvel characters painted by Alex Ross. Alright everyone, so we are going to start off with this look through this Alex Ross Marvels preview. The cover is very simple. It's just an image of the arm and hand of the Human Torch, and that is the android Human Torch. Not the one from the Fantastic Four, not Johnny Storm, but the original Human Torch that existed before Marvel became Marvel. And what you get here is the very first initial, I guess you could say almost like a thumbnail drawing of how Alex Ross wanted to portray the Human Torch in his book. And you can see it's really almost like a silhouette or an outline. It's not really anything that's really defined as far as like his actual style goes, but you get the basic idea of how the Human Torch is going to look in this book. And he said this was the very first image that he drew. And you can analyze it here. You can see some of the, the very crude brush strokes in the background just to kind of give the illusion of a background here. And you can see the human figure within the flames. You can see a person that's just like completely engulfed in flames, but it looks good. It looks good. It gives you the idea of what he is going for in his design work. Coming over here, you see many of the photographs that will be taken by the main character from Marvel's, as he photographs the history of the Marvel universe. Like you see classic images of Spider-Man battling the Vulture. We got Iron Man flying by. We got a close-up picture of the Incredible Hulk. We got the original X-Men as they're fighting off some rioters. We got Ant-Man and the Wasp. We got Captain America sitting there shaking hands with some kids. You got the Thing trying to be in disguise. Doctor Strange, and of course Johnny Storm's Human Torch giving out the Fantastic Four signal in the sky to call the rest of his comrades. Great idea, and you get the very concept of what Marvel's is kind of turning into. We're seeing these great heroes and these great moments from classic Marvel comics through the eyes of a regular person, and the window character is going to be that photographer that we'll see in the book. So starting off, we got the X-Women painting, and I remember this one very well. Like I had a poster of this, and I actually hung it up in my bedroom way back in the 90s, and I also used this as my computer background for a long time as well. We get an idea of the way that Alex Ross likes to conceptualize these characters. Obviously, the realism is the main idea. Like, it's realism, but is captured in a way that still lean towards the fantasy of it all as well. But we get to see some of the more popular characters from 80s X-Men, starting off with the Dazzler. And of course, you got Jean Grey and her X-Factor costume. We got Rogue, Storm, Psylocke, and Mystique. All the characters looking great. We get to see, the lighting that he has set up obviously is coming from this direction, and kind of lighting on them, like half of their face and half of their bodies, while the shadow is coming from this side. Good. Now, the only one that's not necessarily in costume per se is Storm. She's kind of just in like a regular like evening gown or evening dress, but she's still looking stunning, as Storm is known to do. And I love seeing the individual take on the faces of these women, because you get to see not only characterization, but you also get to see heritage and ethnicity within these faces. So moving on to this great SketchUp of Namor, we get to see like some original preliminary grayscale sketches, and we also get to see some of the painted versions. Now, this is Namor in his original form, like going all the way back to his original creation by the artist Bill Everett. He is muscular, but he's also, more toned. He's not bulky muscular. He's more of like an actual Olympic swimmer. He's kind of got like, the bigger forehead, the extreme widow's peak hairline, and the really long, pronounced eyebrows. So it's very much how Namor was portrayed in those early comics, and I like that. I like the way it looks, because it gives an otherworldly feel to see Namor in this context. People nowadays have tried to make Namor look more human, and I think that that's a big mistake. I like the idea of taking that classic comic book design and putting that onto a real, or I guess you could say a more real surface and face. That way it looks a little bit more otherworldly. He doesn't look like he comes from Earth. He looks humanoid, but you can tell that there is something different about him. So you get the idea that he comes from somewhere else. And now we have the art of Ben Grimm, and we get to see Ben Grimm in all his human form, as well as how he looks as the Thing. And obviously in a lot of early Fantastic Four comics, Ben Grimm will walk the streets in a trench coat and a hat and some shades, as if that was really going to hide his form. But, he was kind of trying to hide from the world. But you still get to see that great Ben Grimm personality, and you even get like a little sketch right here, a little grayscale sketch of Alicia Masters, who is his one true love, the one woman who accepts him for how he truly is and accepts him for his. Next, we get my favorite villain of all time, Dr. Doom, one of the most evil men in the Marvel universe. And we get a vision of him, not only, like a full frontal face and him sitting on his throne, but you get to see, I guess, like a little bit of how Victor Von Doom looked before his accident. And we get to see kind of like an image of Mephisto in the background, who is the one that is holding on to Doom's mother's soul. But we get classic Doom in his costume, and he's kind of looking directly at you, and you can see how this character would be someone scary to look at. On the opposite end of the spectrum, now we get a realistic version of Iron Man, or I guess you could say Tony Stark in his Iron Man costume. You get the original Iron Man costume that he built while he was in that cave trying to escape the communists. And then we get the classic Golden Avenger armor that he built later on. And you get even like a little bit of a sketch here of what Tony Stark looks like without his mask. And of course, Alex Ross kind of used Timothy Daltrey as kind of like a reference for how he expected Tony Stark to look. Like, even if you go look at Marvel's later on, or some of the other books that Alex Ross worked on where he was portraying Iron Man, the actor Timothy Daltrey, who also was one of the 007s, is kind of like his version of what Tony Stark actually looks like. Moving on to one of my favorite drawings in this book, we got the Black Widow. And, you get to see Natasha as in her, like spy superhero garb, and she's got the short hair, which was kind of like what her hair looked like during this time in the early 90s. But the way Alex Ross is portraying it is that's how Natasha actually looks. But when she's going into her spy game, she likes to wear, obviously, wigs and different disguises in order to hide her true identity. So you get to see her with like the longer hair that we're used to seeing her with, but you also get some of her costumes, both in sketch form and also in painted form. Now, I like how this book is sort of laid out where you get opposites of the different types of characters. Like just before, we saw Dr. Doom, who was an armored villain, and we got to see Iron Man as the armored hero. Now we get to see kind of like the tough, capable Black Widow on one page, and a little bit more of a vulnerable female character in Gwen Stacy. Now, if you ever read Marvels, you know that she is actually a very big component, especially of the very last issue, the very last chapter of Marvels. And we get to see her here painted very well by Alex Ross. And at this point, the character had not been retconned, so she was still dead. We still had Gwen Stacy in her classic context, which I appreciate. And I think this is the way that the character should be remembered. I really don't like all the retcons that they did with Gwen Stacy. I think they kind of took away a lot of her innocence as a character by some of the retcons that they put into the book later on. But this was classic Gwen Stacy, and I like the way her outfits look, very much reminiscent of the way John Romita Sr. designed her. And we get to see, different shots of Spider-Man also in this collage here, and also the villainous Green Goblin down there at the bottom, who we know is the one who winds up killing Gwen Stacy. And here we have another one of my favorite images from this book, and that is Alex Ross's version of the Black Panther. I remember very much looking at this and being very intrigued by this, getting to see a black superhero portrayed in a live action fashion. Very inspirational to me as a young black teenager when I was getting into drawing and creating my own superheroes. So getting to see this was just a big deal, and something that fascinated me then as well as now. Now, this is probably the most interesting image in this entire book here, where we get to see a collage of different events and characters within the Marvel universe, and it's painted in like a collage and expressionism where we see, maybe just very basic silhouettes of certain characters or things blending into one another. We get to see, obviously, the Invisible Woman and Franklin Richards. We get to see Dr. Banner sort of morphing into the Hulk. I always like this image because it's almost very nightmarish in the way that this part looks right here, the way that Dr. Banner transforms into the Hulk. Melding of the colors, but you get to see a little bit of red there, like with under around his eyes. You can tell he's probably like tired or very anxious, and you get to see it in his mouth, and it kind of carries on into his gums right here. I think that adds a little bit of violence to it by adding that extra color in there that probably wouldn't exist normally. Obviously, the large image of Galactus kind of looming in the background. We get to see the Rainbow Bridge going into Asgard. We get to see just a very brief silhouette of Professor X. I do like this portrayal of Professor X here, kind of looming in this area. Get to see a little bit of J. Jonah Jameson and the Negative Zone. It almost sort of reminds me, not to toot my own horn, but it reminds me of some of the things that I draw in my own sketchbook. Like my sketchbook is kind of a mess like this, whereas, multiple images kind of colliding together. But this is done in a more artistic fashion, and I think it works very well all together. So this was a concept that I guess that Ross was working on for his own version of like Iron Man. Like he wanted to do like some Iron Man stories. So this was going to be the design that he was going to use for Iron Man, where it's kind of like a combination of the old and the new. Like if you think about Iron Man's very first Golden Avenger costume, where it kind of have like the sharp wings for the mask part, and you get to see a few sketches in the background, not just the Iron Man, but the Black Widow and her costume, as well as Tony Stark fighting his descendant, the Iron Man from 2020. So this was, I guess, going to be one of the main battles in the book. You get to see Iron Man fight one of his descendants from the future. And we talked about this I did a review of a classic West Coast Avengers where they showcased that version of Iron Man that came from the future, who has like buzzsaws and gears and everything else sticking out of his costume. I thought he's a cool character. So he would have been a very cool villain to have Iron Man fight against in this Alex Ross book. Now, the next page, we get a sketch or grayscale painting of the Inhumans. Some of my favorite characters from the Marvel Universe, who I think that never got any real justice in their live action. Anyone who saw that Inhuman show, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But here, with the way that Alex Ross designed them, they look very cool. And you would think, like, if I was working on that show, or if I was working on anything that included the Inhumans, I would try to, maybe go find some of the artists that have worked on the Inhumans and try to incorporate some of their designs and some of their ideas into my live action version. I mean, hell, why not do that? But, Disney/Marvel doesn't actually like to hire people who are fans of the comics to work on their live action stuff. That's pretty obvious by some of the choices that they make. But on the next page, we get to see the villainous Hobgoblin. And I do enjoy the way that Ross both portrays the Hobgoblin as well as the Green Goblin, because they actually look scary. When you look at their comic book version, it'd be real easy to like say, well, if this was actually realistic, this character would not be intimidating or scary at all. But Alex Ross, with his realistic style, is able to portray how fearsome these characters would look. Like if you saw a guy flying around that looked like this would not be someone to laugh at, especially if he's throwing bombs at you or whatnot. This would be someone that you would be scared and you'd be running for your life if you saw someone like this. Or if you just saw him in a dark alley somewhere, this would definitely not be someone you'd want to have any type of confrontation with. So on the next page, we get the other version of the X-Women pinup that Alex Ross designed. So the other one, they were kind of just all standing there, just straightforward and looking at you. But this one is done in a more artistic way and more of a collage. And You get to see the X-Women, and you get to see more of them, more of the women from the X-Men comics. Like in this one, they've included Emma Frost, the White Queen. They've included Polaris, and they've included McGann from Excalibur. So you get to see some other ones as well, not just the ones that we saw earlier. And it's done in this actual pretty cool X-frame that is designed for this pinup and poster. But I like this one. I like this one a lot. And I think this one is better than the last one that we saw. I like the way the other one is painted, but this one you get more of the women in their actual costumes and the different designs, and they're also in different poses. So I think it actually came out pretty well. Now I really like this version of Rogue with the classic poofed up 80s hair. Like that's probably my favorite pinup in this whole situation here. And I enjoy seeing Storm actually in costume and not just in an evening gown in this one. And the final image is of the classic Spider-Man cover from Amazing Fantasies, where Spider-Man was on the cover picking up the criminal, and we got our introduction to this superhero. Alex Ross does his version, and I really like the way that this image looks because it is obviously a very famous image from comic book history, but we get to see it in a different way, and we get that color of like that sunset kind of shining on the character, because the original drawing didn't have that type of lighting, but in this realistic painted world we get to see the lighting, and that adds to the drama of what we're actually seeing here. And I really like it. I enjoy the angle, the extreme angle of the buildings themselves, and getting to see really just silhouettes of the people. In the original comic book cover, you actually got to see the people a little bit more, and that's per the course of comic books. But in here, you just get to see their silhouettes in the background, and obviously the surprise on the criminal's face as he's being picked up and swung by Spider-Man. And this angle is actually a little bit more extreme as well than the original cover, because the original cover is almost like a front, so you can see Spider-Man's costume and the glow. But this one is more realistic, as if it was taken as a picture of somebody who was kind of off screen here, taking an image or a video of Spider-Man swinging by with this criminal. So very well done, and gives you a perfect view of the type of art that Alex Ross is going to be creating as time goes on. So that is the end of our flip through and review of the Marvel's preview artwork done by Alex Ross. I definitely have more of Alex Ross. I have his works done by DC. I also have a sketchbook that my wife bought me where it has some of the DC sketches, like some of his original sketches for books like Kingdom Come and Justice. So we will definitely be getting into those as time goes on. So if you like my channel and you want to continue watching me do more flip through and reviews of classic comics and classic comic artwork, go ahead and subscribe to this channel. Make sure you like this video and share it with anyone else who is a fan of these classic comics. Anyway, this is Chris Crazy House signing out. Peace.